Hello, everyone. Welcome to a three-part series, which I'm going to be entitling Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, a retrospective. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator has meant so much to me, and it has provided me with so many great opportunities to reach out to the community with my hobby, as well as experience just some good old flying. It got me through in a couple of renewals of a flight license. It got me to experience some new airplanes I never thought I would like. And it's even got me to meet some new folks, which I probably never would have met before, who've really kind of touched me in so many great ways. So what I wanted to do in this first video in the series is I wanted to recreate the first flight I ever did in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. So let's get started. So I remember when I first installed this game that it was a bit of a shock to me, just how good everything looked. I remember sitting inside the cockpit here, seeing the way the light hit everything. Of course, I was on a different computer then, and my graphics were like set way too high, and my frame rate wasn't good. And I remember just doing something as stupid as this, and taking a look at the grass and noticing the grass wiggles just a little bit. And if the wind picked up or something like that, you've got the little kind of person over there. I kind of crouched down. I remember looking at this little hill here. I think I was like fiddling with like the keys to try to like figure out how to make different things work. I believe the little fuel panel had popped up because I was parked at the wrong stop. Ellington Airport, 7 Bravo 9, by the way. Trying to like identify this building and like try to figure out which one was which. And then looking down at the satellite imagery and being like, oh, what's this? What's this? And trying to remember it all, in both in the real world as well as my experiences in here. And I picked the Cessna 152 for the first one. Probably should have done the 172 because that's something I'd flown quite a bit more. But this was kind of the thing I decided to go with. And I remember like initially like messing up with the camera because I was like an X-Plane guy. So obviously X-Plane, you have kind of different cameras. And I'll be honest, X-Plane camera is fantastic. Flight Sim camera is the most, you can see exactly what I mean. It's just awkward. But I remember fiddling with the camera, trying to like get my views set, and then doing like the standard thing I would do, and like all these planes, I try to float into the back seat like an idiot, and like I couldn't get in the back seat and everything. And I'm like, oh, I wonder which one of the buttons work. So the first thing I check, of course, was all the circuit breakers. None of the circuit breakers work. I remember not so much being disappointed as like, oh, you know what I mean? Like you kind of hoped deep down inside they would have like done all the like super detailed modeling. And I just remember like sitting there going, oh, that kind of sucks. But I mean, but everything looks so good. I mean, the bacon light is the bacon light and all those kind of components. And of course, after I did all that, got everything kind of where I needed it to go, I said, well, we got to get this thing started. I remember like messing up all my controls and everything and really, really struggling to kind of get all that stuff done, even though I kind of knew what I was doing. So I went through the motions, just like I was starting up the real one. Came over here, I jammed the mixture forward, I got my bacon light on, getting all pro. I remember accidentally discovering this menu for the first time, and you'll notice like one of the first thing I ever did was to shut off basic controls, shut off travel to, shut off VFR map. These are all options that I always had, but I never actually used them, so I just shut them off. And like having that local map view that was creating like lag in the early days and everything, it was so much fun. So of course I got in here and got this thing. I got everything ready to go. So I'm like, I'll go prime it. So I sit here, prime it. I remember trying to drag this with my finger, but you don't. You just kind of crank it. It's a pretty cold day today, so I'm gonna give it 4 pumps there. So that's pretty good to go. And then I'm like, all right, I can't wait. Let's do it. Let's do it. And then like doing one of these things with the mouse, where you're like trying to click to the right position, but you keep like accidentally. Then you use the mouse wheel and you do one of those. You crank it. And then you looked over and the engine just stalls. So you like give it throttle and everything, and the engine shuts off. And it's just like absolute disappointment here. And I remember being like, what the hell? Like, what is this something new? Did I like not prime it? Like, then I fiddled with the primer. Then of course I realized that on this aircraft, there's a fuel valve you have to open. And I just remember that experience of that going, oh, shoot. So then of course you sit there realizing there's no fuel. So you prime it again. Finally I bound a key on my keyboard so I could just go clunk, just like that. And I cranked the thing. And I remember hearing the engine noises rushing through. And just hearing that, it has that little, like, almost like a purr. And I was like, oh, they got the purr right. And then I was really impressed when you look out the window. You can actually watch the airplane kind of shifting around a little bit. Like if I crank it in the real world, the whole plane would twist, but you don't really get that here. But you get this nice little kind of up and down bounce. And I remember like going to this view and everything like that. And like just looking at the whole plane kind of doing its little happy dance there, which is exactly what it would do in the real world. And I was like so tickled by that they finally got that little detail right. And then, of course, I'm like trying to go through all like the usual stuff. I'm like, oh, ADF, I love ADF. And like coming to the ADF and trying to turn it on. And then, of course, I discovered the ADF doesn't work. Like, you know what I mean? How it was almost bittersweet. Like how a lot of things look so good and they sounded so good. So I'm like, well, we got to go flying now. So, I hit the parking brake. I turned it on, turned it off. And then, of course, I made my way over to the runway, giving it a little bit of power here. Oh, there we go. And then I headed right for this first runway that I saw, which, of course, being an actual pilot, one of the mistakes was I didn't take a look at the windsock. Fortunately for us today, the windsock is favoring us. I remember like sitting here, like holding the brakes, and I'm like, oh, I've got to do the run up. I got to see if it does the thing. So I run down here and give it a bunch of throttle. And I always forget where the tachometer is on this plane. You give it about, it's plenty right there. And then you come over here and you'd be fiddling with the key, like trying to click it with the mouse, and you'd start it by accident. And get a little bit of a drop, give it a little power, come down a couple. Shut the engine off by accident, which I did almost every single time. You pull the throttle to idle, that would do its thing. I like pull the carb heat, like it, all these really, really good little things. And I was all so excited. Then, of course, I taxied on the runway. I remember this was like, again, the first thing I ever did with this plane. And when I had, popped the flaps down on one click, I'm sitting there going, this is Cessna 152 at Ellington Airport. We don't exactly have oodles and oodles of space here. One of the things I made a mistake when I had bound my controls for the first time is I accidentally set it up so the brake only worked on the left side, which in subsequent real-world flights has happened to me now. So it's kind of just like prescient, I guess is what I would say. So, you do your little washing of your controls and everything like that. And that's when I noticed for the first time controls weren't linear. Like the distance between half stick here and full stick here is like an entire rotation. And I'm like, it won't cause a problem. Let's do it. So then, of course, full power. Release that brake. And I'd start ripping down the runway. And I'm like, oh, because I was expecting like, a little more drama, like the whole thing to be buffeting and shaking and everything. But the sound was really, really good. You got a little bit of that rattle. I'm like sitting there getting bounced around to the runway going, I got to get in the air at some point. My hand instantly reached for the gear lever, even though I didn't need it, just kind of powering up like this. And I remember just being taken aback by the absolute beauty of everything that was around me. Like, I know that, like, we look at this now and you're like, oh, green, yay. But just the density of everything, it melted my brain. Like, I was not mechanically ready for how you could do such a good looking flight sim. I remember basically taking my nice pank here. I'll make sure my flaps are all cleaned up and everything like that. Got to return my volume back to a believable level. That's a classic pilot joke if you note it. Looking out the window, of course, back then I had slightly different joystick arrangements. So like this was a lot harder to do in the very, very early days. And then, of course, the first thing that happens is I start playing wait, that neighbor has a pool game. And I was reminded of when I went skydiving for the first time, actually out of the airport you just saw me take off from. When I was taking off from that airport, I remember like being happy to get out of the plane because it was like a Twin Otter and it was just like a disaster as far as handling goes. So then, I'm kind of doing the thing. I'm taking in the sights. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Just blown away. Like I know that barn like personally, and I know what sits over there on the left. And like I looked up ahead and there's like the high school and stuff. And I knew it was the high school. I actually recognized it as the high school, except that's not the high school. That's the cow farm. So then you come over here and there's the high school. But it was just one of those things where I was so tickled by everything. And then, of course, I'm like trying to remember how to be a pilot again, going, okay, wait a minute. So Ellington Airport's over kind of to my east there. And I think it's about 1,200 feet. And like, not being a very good pilot about it, but like just getting lost in the visuals to me was like the biggest thing. I look out my side here. And then, of course, I saw Ellington Airport. And I'm thinking about what does it look like in X-Plane? What did it look like in Flight Simulator 10, and just kind of getting a feel for all those things. And of course, this is when I realized that the drag model in this game was a little different. So I pulled the throttle to 0, and of course, you can always get a couple clicks of flaps in right away. In this plane, when you click those flaps in at that speed, your nose goes like this. I didn't feel that. So, I held it back a little bit, held it back a bit. I'm like, you know what? Let's try a stall and see what happens. Not quite. That was a very aggressive stall. And I remember when that happened to me the first couple times, I'm like, what? Like I was not ready for that because in the real plane, like everything bends differently in a real plane. And like when you get to those really, really low speeds like that, like you can, I don't know, it has like a feel. It's hard to explain, but again, it's one of those things a flight sim will never reproduce. Then I remember coming in for landing and totally forgetting what the approach speed on a Cessna 152 was. I'm sitting there going, was it 55? Was it 60? I know it wasn't 65 because that's a 172. And then I'm coming down here at like 155. Then I realize I'm kind of high. And obviously I've got 4 years of experience landing this plane now. So it's a little different than the first time. But I remember looking down at that number 1 at the end of the runway and then seeing those trees and not knowing if the trees were solid because like an X-plane, they weren't solid. Giving just a tap of power kind of in that last little bit of approach there to make it a little bit easier. See that nice buffeting there, pulling it over the runway, and then kind of playing the, call it Cessna 152 keep away game here. Whoa, it is actually a little gusty today. Get ready for a little bit of right aileron. There we go. Let's go settle it. and being able to kind of gently place that on the ground and like not even having to stand on the brakes because it's like, hey, it actually has a normal amount of drag on this thing. Again, a little bit of a right aileron and things that things that I do much better than when I first started this stuff, kind of a thing. And of course, we don't get on the brakes until the very end because brakes are very expensive. But you just kind of do one of those pieces like that, and of course, during this, the part that I'm not going to share with you, of course, is me going back and forth trying to get the graphics settings reasonable. Because I remember, like, the frame rate was good, but it wasn't fantastic. The other thing I do not have turned on is if you look around, you see how there's none of those icons that the game defaults to, kind of a thing like that. None of that exists. So fortunately, like, I shut all that stuff off later, like, change my realism settings and everything like that. But it was just incredible. And then, of course, my next step in my first flight ever, I was very, very happy with myself, and I liked the fact I got my first landing ever in. And so the first thing I did is I looked up the key for this. Ha ha! And this is the slew button, is the Y key. And the first thing I had to do, of course, is now I had to go find where everything was in the state I live. So I went down here. I went to the Connecticut River. There was Bradley International Airport right there. And then I went on Route 91. That's this highway right here. Then I went down here to Brainerd Airport, which is directly below me right there. I got so tickled by that I went down here. I looked at the little twist in the river. Kept ripping, kept ripping, kept ripping. Came directly towards the coast here. And I remember like going through the different rivers and be like, there's a river there, and like, oh, there's a lake there, like, doing one of those, like the usual just shenanigans. And then of course, so when I had sick of zipping around at maximum speed exploring, keep in mind my frame rate was never this good in the early days, running around trying to see if I could find like little airports that I had zipped by in the previous years and stuff like that at like a low altitude. Trying to find actually one of the bridges I'm trying to find here. I have the same problem I had the first time I did it, where I was basically running around trying to identify different components of Connecticut, saying, isn't there supposed to be a town there? Or like there's a bridge. Found it. And then going all the way down here to like Goodwin and not realizing that when you kill the power, when you kill Slew, by the way, it inherits whatever your previous speed is. So you do one of those kinds of things. So, I did a little bit of that, kind of cruising around, and I'm like, I wonder how hard this runway is going to be to land on, kind of a thing. So you have to do your first emergency landing, just to see if you still got it, so to speak. I remember kind of like fiddling with the rudder and everything like that, trying to hold it steady. Let's see, I need to be able to see. And we got a little bit of energy left. Oh, not anymore, we don't. Oh boy, not going to make it. Not going to make it. Not going to make it. Nope, not going to come close to making it. Don't breathe. Nobody breathe. Nobody breathe. Oh, not gonna make it. Excuse me. Oh, see, in the real world, there's no trees there. Oh boy, here we go. I needed a little bit of help from some stuff here. Oh boy. Oh boy, here it is. I remember like coming into this landing. I did a little better the first time, actually. Whoa, the wind's, oh boy. A little bit of left aileron. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Left aileron, left aileron, left aileron. There we go, nice. So I remember doing something like that, and there were trees there, and I'm like, what? And I basically did the exact same thing. So that was my first flight that I ever did in Flight Sim 2020. Obviously, it's going to be a little different than I remember, but that was basically what there was to it, is kind of taking off, flying around in the 152 and kind of experimenting with it, and really, really enjoying those kinds of things. So for our next video in this series, Retrospective, I'm going to do the plane that made the most difference to me. This is the aircraft that I took the most out of, the plane that I had the most fun with, the plane that I did all those other kinds of good things. And then for the final video, of course, we'll talk about some of the other things that I did in Flight Sim that I will miss as we move to 2024. Enjoy.